evening. I'm Sharon Seelig, and I have the honor to be the president of First Town Downtown, our Main Street organization. Thank you very much. We have been in existence. We were one of the very first main streets in Connecticut, and it's been 25 years that we've been working to improve Main Street and the town of Windsor, and everything is coming to fruition, and I'm really excited. So tonight, you're going to hear from some different people who have different ideas, and I'm sure you've seen all of the information and everything. Transit-oriented transportation and housing is the buzzword of the day, and Windsor has it all. And Marty Kenny, thank you for these beautiful apartments, and thank you very much for hosting us this evening. So I would like to introduce a young lady who would just like to say a few words this evening. Melissa McRicker is a resident of downtown Windsor, and she would just like to say a few words.
Yeah, just some more. Should I use the microphone?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting about how to make Broad Street safer. After everything that I dealt with the accident, I'm glad that we're here to try to make Broad Street safer.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Melissa was recently hit by a car on Broad Street that ran a red light, and so she's one of the reasons why we need to slow down traffic, among many others. Those of us seniors who are having a little trouble crossing the street these days. So that all being said, and thank you again for being here, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening.
Can you open a window? I'm sorry, anybody would jump. Could you open a window? It's really
I'm sure we can. All right, I'm sure we can take care of that for you. So I would like to introduce Randall Davis. Randall is a resident of Windsor. He went to Loomis, and he worked for the DOT, and now he is this is what I have to know. He's working as the Deputy Director of Development for the City of Hartford. So he brings two hats to us. Thank you, Randall.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I think what I'm going to do as I start to talk is actually call up our panelists. I'm not so that they can have a seat up here, and then in a minute, Peter is going to be speaking. Does that work for you if I do it that way?
Absolutely.
Okay, so why don't we have our panelists come on up here and get a seat, if you know who you are. So real quick, just to echo what Sharon said, so my family's lived in Windsor since 1971. I did go to school here, grew up, rode my bike around here. My grandparents lived here, cousins live here, so I'm a Windsorite, right? So anyway, so tonight we're going to be hearing from a variety of people. We're going to be hearing from Mr. McKinney, who developed these beautiful apartments, as well as Peter Sousa, who you all know as town manager, because he's been doing a great job for a long time, and Patrick McMahon. And for full disclosure, Patrick McMahon is the executive director of CT Main Street, which seeks to help revitalize town centers, and I'm on that board, so I just want to give that full disclosure. And also Matt Hart, who is the town manager for the city of West Hartford. Did I get that right?
And a Windsor alum.
And a Windsor alum. So, without further ado, I'm going to well, and also let me just make a comment. Part of what we're here to talk about tonight is the economic sustainability of complete streets, which is about creating a safe environment for people to walk, bike, and get around in downtown urban areas. And one of the things about that, safety, and coming from the DOT, safety is always the most important thing in the back of my mind. But one of these things that they do when you develop them properly is they help revitalize cities and towns because more people want to walk. And I can think of many places where I go and I don't drive and no one there drives. You get out of your car and you walk and no one ever questions if they have to walk an extra block. So that's part of what developing complete streets is. So with that introduction, I'm going to introduce Peter Sousa, who is actually going to, because you're going to be showing some stuff, right?
I'm not going to show anything this evening.
Oh, you're not?
Change your plans.
Surprise!
Just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, but are you going to speak before we open?
Yes.
Okay, so I turn the floor over to Peter.
Alrighty. Thanks, Randall. Good evening, and thank you to First on Downtown for inviting me to be part of this discussion this evening. I'm going to provide a bit of context before I hand it off to our other speakers. As many of you know, that Town Center has a great set of bones to work from. Really great set of bones. It has great opportunities to also capitalize on. Everything from the train to our open space to future multi-use walkways coming up from Hartford. So we have a lot of things that are going in our direction. And in 2014, the town, with some assistance from the Connecticut Department of Transportation, initiated a community-based master planning process for Town Center. And so we call it our Town Center TOD plan. And so TOD is transit-oriented development. And so you're essentially this evening in a TOD development. This Windsor Station Apartment development that Marty and his partners invested a significant amount of dollars, and we appreciate that, really is an example of transit-oriented development, and it fits in perfectly with the scale and size and location here in Windsor Center. And so the 2014 plan set out a vision. That vision includes being walkable, being connected, having listen to the train, being vibrant, have a whole wide range of diverse uses, also being safe and accessible, and being attractive and unique. So the plan did not set out to remake our town center, it was to enhance our town center. As I said, we have really good bones to work from. So that was going to be done through a variety of strategies that included good design. It included adding residential density where appropriate and at the proper scale. And so again, Windsor Station Apartments, I believe, meets that vision. You can barely hear it.
Sounds beautiful.
So that's one of those opportunities we can capitalize on going forward. So we also, part of that vision was to be able to enhance circulation and mobility for pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users, and of course automobile. We're not going to get rid of the automobile, but how do we manage that, all those different modes of transportation in a better way? And also to build stakeholder capacity. That's all of you, to build support and understanding within the community of the importance of town center and some of the different strategies that the town may need to take. We may need to be a little bolder in certain areas than we've done in the past. We may have to change our zoning regulations. And to that end, in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a number of actions the town council has taken. The planning board has also taken actions where they've changed the zoning regulations. They've reduced the, used to be a minimum number of parking spaces with development in town center. That's been changed to, you can only do a maximum. And Marty and I had many conversations about that regulation when he was looking to build here. They've also enhanced our street connectivity and walkability with the sidewalks along Batchelder Road. It seems hard to believe, but it wasn't but 4 or 5 years ago, you literally took your life in your own hands walking from Geisler's down to the Causeway in Loomis. And it does seem a lot longer than 4 or 5 years ago when that was done. And so the town council put dollars up for that improvement. We've also facilitated investments such as Windsor Station. And I keep on coming back to that because, Marty, I believe it was approximately just under a $25 million investment, perhaps more. And that's brought...
According to your assessor.
According to our assessor. Larry's a fine gentleman. Don't throw me off, Marty. Come on. We've had a lot of conversations, Marty. Most of them good. But it brings a whole set of residents to town center. And those residents bring vitality. They bring people on feet on the street, if you will. And they also bring that thing called money. And brings those multiplier effects here to town center. And that's exactly what we want to do here. But again, we don't want to remake it so that it's not a town center that we all have come to love over time. So I'm going to stop there. The road diet and complete streets certainly is part of the vision, and it's a very large investment and undertaking, but certainly does help make those goals that were set out in the 2014 plan achievable. So thank you very much, and look forward to answering questions.
So right now, I'm just going to ask that each of the other panelists give a couple of minutes about what they do generally speaking. We know that Marty developed this, but just generally speaking, some of the other projects you've been involved in, and also information from Patrick as well as Matt about what they do today. And then I'm going to have some questions about the impact of safety and building complete streets in towns generally speaking. So we'll start with you, Marty.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, welcome to Windsor Station Apartments. I have to give a quick shout out to Aga Puglisi, who's the unofficial mayor of our community. Great property manager, great person, very involved in Windsor, and please thank Dan, he turned on the air conditioning. Thank you, Dan. Nice job. Yes, I mean, Windsor Station here and the other projects that I've been involved with, it's all about town center. It's all about being close to transportation. It's all about community bikes like you've seen in our hallways here tonight. I've been sort of on this kick for the last 20 years or so. I started down in downtown Hartford, and it seems like they're bringing me back. I did what was known as Trumbull on the Park, and which was the adaptive reuse of the historic buildings on Lewis Street, and then the tower where Salute is. And from there, I did a project in Glastonbury called Addison Mill, which was an adaptive reuse where the building was literally falling into the pond and the brook there, and we salvaged that building, which was made long underwear for the Union Army in the Civil War. So, you know, the history of these properties is so important. It's something that we have in New England that people don't have throughout the rest of the country. Last week I was in Akron and Canton and Sandusky, Ohio, looking at apartment portfolios, and they just don't have what we have. And we're so graced. So what we've done since then, I did a project in Glastonbury called the Tannery, which was a mill conversion, 250 apartments. We have a fantastic restaurant there called the Beam House, which looks out on a brook. It's got a waterfall. We've restored all the old mill buildings where we have fitness centers. It's a community. It's a really exciting place. I'm working right now with Matt Hart on a convent conversion over in West Hartford, St. Joseph's. The nuns pray for me every day to put this deal together, so it's been very stressful because I left them down when I was in 2nd grade, so I don't want to do it again. And the thing that we're working on now, and I'm working with my longtime partner Alan Lazowski, who's been a friend and a fellow investor for 30 years, who's so committed to Hartford, and we're working on the Pratt Street redevelopment. We got a very significant I don't know what to call it, I guess subsidy is the right word, which is unfortunately necessary right now to bring a project like that in the middle of town back. And it's a very ambitious project where along the south side of the street, running from the XL Center all the way up to Dish and Main Street, which we also purchased and are renovating. So the idea is to energize that city core with, and the big key of it is the retail. And the retail is about 40,000 square feet, whereas the apartments collectively are over 300 apartments. But that place is going to work only if we reimagine this retail correctly. We've hired a fantastic architectural firm out of New York City that did Chelsea Piers. Chelsea Piers. Very, thank you very much. They really get urban retail, and what we're trying to do is to have people from Windsor and Wethersfield and West Hartford and Glastonbury take a few hours and come down to the city and spend some time there. So the idea is to energize Pratt Street, have seating outside, have entertainment outside, have music venues, not on the scale of Infinity Hall or some of the larger places, but more of an acoustic kind of thing. We've got some great ideas. We have a couple chefs that want to open smaller restaurants, one a Michelin one-star person who was originally from the Hartford area who wants to come back and open a restaurant. So we're really working hard to bring that all together because Hartford, believe it or not, has made unbelievable strides over the last 7 years, particularly under the current mayor's leadership. It's really, there's been an amazing turnaround. And the office space, believe it or not, is filling up. Hartford Healthcare took 100,000 square feet at 100 Pearl. There's another prominent company that's moving to Hartford that's going to be a game changer for us. So it's very exciting. If Hartford wins, Windsor wins, and Wethersfield wins. That's all I got.
Mentioned, which is adaptive reuse. And so when you're thinking about the movie theaters, that's exactly what they're doing, is adaptive reuse to bring it into the modern era, and also scalability. So he talked about Chelsea Piers. I used to live in New York. It's enormous. But then he also talked about some slightly smaller places. So the point I want to get to is that although they're not Windsor, there's what we call scalability, and there are things that we can do here to help that fits in line with what you're saying. So I just want to throw that out there.
Thank you, Randall. It's great to be here. I'm a lifelong Windsor resident and proud to say that. Had the benefit of working with Peter for 5 years and growing up and going to St. Gabe's and Windsor High, so Windsor Center's just really important. We were a mile away up Stony Hill, and my siblings and I would ride our bikes down and walk down to the center, and what we have here is really truly a gem. And as Peter said, I don't think we need to necessarily remake Windsor Center. We've got to enhance it, and that's really the plan going forward. So I'm now the CEO of the Connecticut Main Street Center. We're a statewide nonprofit organization, and we work with communities throughout the state trying to drive investment and activity, vibrancy to the downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts like a Wilson. And what we really do is we espouse a comprehensive approach to downtown revitalization. We work with local affiliates like First Town Downtown. Actually, this is our 25th anniversary, just like First Town Downtown, so we've been at it together. And Sharon's been there just about the whole way. So congrats to
I never
Sharon.
give that.
So that the comprehensive approach, as Randall just said, adaptive reuse. It's promotions, having those events, our annual Shad Derby and the Chili Challenge, that's absolutely critical. Making our downtowns more walkable and bikeable and transit friendly is an initiative certainly of ours. Small business development. And how many people in the room are small business owners? Small business owners. And so creative financing is really important. Certainly, approach your local bank like Windsor Federal and and others, but we've got to look at creative financing to help some of our small businesses either launch or regrow. So we've been trying to help communities understand those tools. The adaptive reuse, the historic preservation aspect of it, there's funding that building owners who have historic buildings could potentially utilize. Downtown is the Broad Street Historic District, and so a lot of the buildings actually do qualify for state historic tax credits. So that's what we try to be. We try to be a resource for those programs and financing aspects that can help move projects forward. We're just a phone call away. Since First Down Downtown is a member of the community, they can reach out to us at any time with questions. We have networking events during the course of the year and educational programming. Our next one that folks in the room are certainly welcome to is going to take place in Hartford on March 6th, and it's on the importance of urban parks and green space. We're going to have a landscape architectural firm out in Britain to design. It's done a lot of work with Bushmill Park and other locations. Present why urban spaces are really critical to downtowns and the programming of that. So that's a little bit about Connecticut Main Street Center, and look forward to the conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Hart, West Hartford Town Manager. It's wonderful to be here and see so many familiar faces in the room. I got my start in the local government field here with the town of Windsor. I was here from 95 to 2000. And one of my final projects was working to get the groundwater in this immediate area designation reclassified to facilitate this type of development. So I remember this general vicinity as the site of the Parks Department, Parks Garage, if I recall correctly. And it's really neat to see how it's been improved. So kudos to you, Marty, and your team for an excellent job here. I've been involved in a couple of related initiatives. I worked for the town of Mansfield, better known as Stores, for 17 years, and was very involved in the Stores Center project. Do we have some UConn alums in the room? Good to see some fellow Huskies. I don't know if folks have been back to town recently, but the center is quite different than it was not so long ago. So Store Center was roughly a $250 million public-private partnership, and a key element of that was to build something of a college downtown. You know, for whatever reason, Stores downtown never developed there, and the community really wanted one. You know, they wanted to see something like Hanover or Northampton. You know, you think of the great college towns around the Northeast and elsewhere. So Mansfield and the University of Connecticut had a keen interest in building something like that for decades, and we're finally able to form a public-private partnership starting around 2001. And it took 10 years of planning, permitting, lining up master developers, etc. Broke ground in 2011, and it's been quite successful for the community. There's a portion of 195, also known as Stores Road, State Road. You know, that's essentially the town's main street. And we were able to successfully apply to the DOT to reduce that from 4 lanes to 2 and actually have on-street parking on a state route. You know, virtually unheard of at the time. And that was quite a major lift for our development team and the town, working with DOT to talk about context-sensitive design and how actually on-street parking can be a very successful traffic calming measure. So ultimately we were successful, the DOT supported it, and the road was reconfigured. Working on 2 related initiatives right now in West Hartford. One, we are looking at a road diet for a section of North Main Street. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, the section that runs from roughly Fern to Bishop's Corner. Right. Very busy corridor, probably I think 25,000 cars per day. But the road, lane widths are quite small, only 11 feet, I believe. It's not safe, or folks are concerned about pedestrian safety, the ability to cycle on the street, quality of life for folks who live in that corridor. So some years back, and I see Emily from CROG here, I think she worked on the project. CROG did an initial study of the road diet, and the town is now taking it to a phase 2. And what we're going to do is actually do a road diet trial, because we've got a lot of folks concerned about how the road diet might impact other roads, Trout Brook Drive, and others in that immediate vicinity. So we're actually going to do a trial of the proposed diet, and we're looking to go from 4 lanes to 3, including a center turning lane. And then similarly, there's a portion of New Park Avenue, if folks are familiar with that, from roughly New Britain Avenue, the intersection of New Britain Avenue to Talcott, where we're looking to do a road diet as well, going from 4 lanes to 3, including a center turning lane. That's an area that we're really trying to focus on for transit-oriented development. There is a brand new mixed income housing authority project there, 616 New Park. Very successful, about 60 units. There's no immediate way for the folks who live there. There's no crosswalk to the businesses across the street. They need to walk a half a mile up the street in order to cross the road legally. So we want to look to change that. Another thing we're working to address as part of that project, we have the home design network on that section of New Park Avenue. That is a group of small businesses as well as Home Depot that specialize in home design. You know, high quality tile, bathroom fixtures, etc. Those merchants are very, very concerned about the potential for gentrification along that section of New Park. And they're concerned about being pushed out. So we are working with them in an effort to assuage their concerns and talk about a balanced approach. We want you to stay, we want you to be successful, but at the same time we see very good potential for mixed use along this corridor. So those are just a couple of relevant projects that I've worked on in the past and I'm working on now. Thrilled with Marty and his colleagues' interest in the One Park project, and Marty, I know we'll make that one happen too. Thanks.
So I don't think I need a microphone. You guys can move it around as you need it. So what you just heard is a lot of information from these 4 guys who have done a lot of different work. You heard about the financing aspect that infuses every single project that we do. You heard from Matt about some of the challenges in the infrastructure and just the space and the fact that we still have to get cars around because they're not going away tomorrow. And from Marty, you heard about kind of the projects that he's built. And I think part of what the group here is interested in, you know, as Windsor residents, is how all of those things impact our thoughts about what downtown Windsor should be. So the question I'm throwing out to you and what someone posed to me is, I would like you to talk about, from your own perspectives, the importance of multimodal with regard to business development, retaining businesses, and also retaining and growing residential units. So that's kind of my questions about the multimodal. By multimodal, I mean pedestrians, walking, as well as biking. Because sometimes people don't think about that, and I do think if you look at some large, I shouldn't even say large city centers, if you look at some city centers, including even West Hartford, it's challenging, but it's very walkable when you're in the downtown center. People get out of their car and they walk 6 blocks and they don't think about it. So that's the question I have for you, the importance of multimodal in all of these developments. And you can, either one of you can start. You don't need to choose, right?
Yeah, I'll say that it's kind of tough to judge the economic impact sort of globally when it comes to multimodal. It so much depends on the fabric of the locality, how dense it already is, what the sort of transportation network is. So there has been complete streets that have taken place in some downtowns, and then we'd have a specific economic impact study related to those. But again, if you go online and you try to understand this from just a global standpoint, it's really tough, right, Emily, to find this data. But there have been a couple of studies that basically state, one's from the United Kingdom, that if you do that multimodal transit improvements, actually you can increase retail sales in your main street by 30%. Another stat from the same study is that if you are a walker or a biker, you actually will spend 40% more than folks who visit the downtown in a car. And there's a lot of statistics about how much bike riders, when they're traveling, will actually spend locally at the local restaurants and the retail. So like Windsor Center's River Trail would be a big attraction, and bikers would be able to come down and enjoy the restaurants. So it's really kind of tough to look at it from a global standpoint. It would, there have been some studies on walk score. Is anybody in the room familiar with walk score? You basically can go to a website, walkscore.org.com, and put in an address, and it will tell you basically a score from 1 to 100. And it's graded whether you're really walkable, you're somewhat walkable. Here in Windsor Center, our score, I believe, is a 62, so it's considered somewhat walkable. Our bike score is in the 40s. It's still somewhat bikeable, but there is room for improvement. One of the studies, though, says that for every sort of extra point on the walk score, the property values increase pretty significantly.
So if I could just add, if you go to realestate.com or any of those places and you're looking for a rental or a house, the walk score pops up next to it. So it's already built in there. People are looking for that, particularly younger people or people who are downsizing and don't want to drive everywhere. They want to know what the walk score is often.
And I'll just add anecdotal evidence for communities that have done streetscape projects. You hear from the shop owners, yes, it has increased our sales. Have any data points been developed? Not necessarily, but when you have happy small businesses, that's a good indicator.
Just to add to Patrick's comments, I think the complete streets approach is also very important for livability, for folks living within the corridor. You know, West Hartford is blessed. We've got close to 400 miles of sidewalks. You can walk virtually anywhere in town, which is fabulous. But those two sections I talked about, it's difficult for people who live in that immediate corridor. That section of North Main I mentioned, where we're going to do the road diet trial, the shoulders are quite narrow. If you're walking on the road, you're right on the street. And the property, there are some very nice homes and properties along that section, but their values are, I would estimate, maybe 20%, 15 to 20% less. I think in part, large part due to their location, to add to Patrick's point. And I think Marty can probably speak better to this, but my sense is, particularly for multifamily units, you know, this is the future. You know, what's in some ways, what's old is new. You know, walkability, the cycling, the transit component. Folks who are attracted to units such as this, I see the future for our region, and I think alternate forms of transportation, in addition to a single passenger car, is what people who live here rely upon, increasingly so. And I think if we want to be successful as communities, as a region, we need to embrace that.
And I'll make one more comment as they're handing it down to Marty. And Patrick, you probably know this, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Minneapolis, Minnesota. They have extensive bike trails, and Emily back there would know as well. And it's a cold region. They get a lot of snow, but they had extensive bike trails that people use during the day to get to work. So it's not something that's not possible. You know, Windsor is not as dense, obviously, as Minneapolis, but it's something to think about both for a town center as we're connecting to other places as well.
Yeah, can I just add one thing? Yeah, I mean, because we have relatives out in Seattle, Portland, and those places, I mean, in Seattle proper, I mean, the bike is a major commuter mechanism. I mean, they have dedicated bike ways now in both those towns, and it's hugely successful. So, I mean, I think, these are beautiful examples of how, you know, these large urban areas have adapted this mode, and the younger generation, younger than me, but have just jumped on it and love it. So this is how they get along. And my son-in-law lives out in Portland right now, and he's biking, biking 20, 25 miles a day, and it's not considered abnormal.
So I'd just like to put a little bit of additional comments. There's about 2,500 residents that live, excuse me, in what we would consider town center. So about 3/4 mile radius from around where we sit today. Now there's about 2,500, a little less than 2,500. And remember, Windsor Town Center is only half a town center. We don't have the advantage that West Hartford does, where you have 360 degrees. And so we really need to make that connectivity. How do we connect the great neighborhood here in Town Center to the west of Broad Street, over to where the retail and business shops are, and to the open space? And so how do we make sure that's walkable? But in terms of the multimodal aspect of it, we have over 26,000 jobs in the town of Windsor. Those are jobs within the private sector, mainly within the private sector. And a good chunk of those are in our corporate area along Day Hill Road. So looking how we connect our town center with where the commuter rail station is, and we have the interchange with the bus with CT Transit. How do we make sure that we're connecting the town center with those 25,000 or so jobs that are there? I've told the story, and many of you probably have heard this, is that if there's a resident or household here in Windsor, and they have a great one of the partners has a great opportunity to get a job, say in New Haven, they have to make this unbelievable choice. Do we lift our entire family up and move to the New Haven region, or can we take advantage of the commuter rail situation that's here? And we can stay in their hometown or their adopted hometown, as in my case, and not have to uproot their entire family, but their family all of a sudden becomes perhaps economically in a better place. And they're able to come back here, stay here, be part of our community. And so that's, to your point, Randall, that's, I think, the viability of the having multimodal transportation here. And so someone that lives perhaps over on Washington Park or on Hayden can walk here and grab that 6:20 train and still be back here by 6 o'clock in the evening as well.
So Matt said something very interesting, and it involves a project that we're currently developing in Wethersfield, and that was the idea. This project that we're doing is on Silestein Highway, which is makes I-195 look like a very solemn street. So that's of great interest. And Melissa, when you brought up your recent tragedy, that really resonated with me, because we're trying to bring 150 residents to the Silestein Highway. We're developing right by where the Marshalls is right now. We converted an office building into 39 apartments. And then next door, where it used to be called the Fun Zone, I think Aga played there as a child. We have taken down that building. We're putting up another 111 units. We need, and we've had discussions, and we're having more discussions with the town, both economic development and manager, and the DOT, about ways that we can slow down the traffic on the Silestein. You know, there's the way where you can, when you have a red light, a strobe goes out, and a sound, so that there's everything to do with making it more pedestrian friendly. We're fortunate that you could go down Mill Street and go to the bike trails, and there's all sorts of things to do beneath the Putnam Bridge. But you know, really, we want people walking to the restaurants and the grocery stores that are nearby. We'd like them to take the community bikes. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And there's, I believe it's like 30,000 cars that go by that location a day. But the good news is it's walkable, it's visible, it's got what people are looking for to live, but we gotta slow those cars down.
And wait, and what are people looking for to live? What is your impression of that?
What are they looking for there? I mean, what we're seeing already are people that live in town that want to be proximate to places. They don't want to get in the car and drive anymore. you know, you got to think about it. Our world has changed, and people don't want to go to a restaurant and go out, and they don't want to drive anymore, period. You know, there's some people, their lives and their livelihoods are dependent on not having any trouble with driving. So it's really important to be in a central location.
So I guess my next question for you, and thank you for that, I think it helps us get a picture of what people are looking for generally, but I want to make sure that I'm not biased towards bike riding versus other things, but I think what I was trying to get at is the fact that when you're creating a more vibrant downtown, that you need to address all of those things, because even, I remember, didn't talk to Marty, I think I was talking to Peter when you were talking about how this place had gotten filled up. You talked at a much larger meeting about the fact that it had been filled up pretty quickly. It was pretty astounding how quickly all the units got filled up. So I think the next question I have for you, it'll be my last question, so if you have questions out there, begin to think about them. But I guess the bigger one challenge, which you have all come to from different directions, is when you develop a master plan and you have properties that you want to redevelop and residents want certain things, where do you begin? Because it can be challenging. So when you talked about your things, there was a lot of private investment in that. One of the projects that Matt talked about was almost 100% public investment. So for a town like Windsor, where do you start? And I'm not putting you on that because I realize that you're heavily involved in this, but just thinking about that and from the perspectives of other experts as well as yourself.
I'm going to let the folks that are visitors to town be able to provide their context, and I'll add to that.
Perfect.
These folks hear me all the time, so I'm here to learn as well.
So I don't know where Windsor is in its process, but based on my experience, starting with stakeholder engagement is very important. You know, looking at my experience with the store center project, design charrettes, etc., you may be well past that. Another important, a very important component of the town's analysis of the benefits of store center, we did a fiscal impact analysis. So we looked at, on the expenditure side, what the anticipated development might cost the town in terms of a service burden. You know, what we might need to add, or how many school children might be generated, for example, what we might need to add for police, firefighters, etc. So we looked at the cost side of the equation, and then we put the revenues over that. We estimated the net tax revenue for the community, job creation, other benefits to the local economy. And that analysis was very positive. And I think that was very helpful in terms of getting the community, the greater community, behind the project and willing to support the public investment. We were, I think we did a good job in structuring the deal. As I said, it was roughly $250 million project. About $30 million of that was the public component. We were able to get $26 million in state grants, and then $3 million tax abatement. That's how we were able to finance the public component. We didn't need to issue a dime of debt on the town side. But stakeholder engagement, doing a fiscal impact analysis were warranted. I think that was beneficial for the community at large and our elected officials.
So it does all start with planning. Having master plans in place is absolutely critical. I'll take a step back. One of the things that's been a real driver for the whole region is the Hartford line and the fast track. Those two things are total game changers, and because of those, we were able to get some significant planning dollars from the Department of Transportation to do transit-oriented development planning. So, for instance, in New Britain, which I think is a poster child for complete streets, they started looking at their downtown in 2008 because they were going to have the terminus of the fast track. In 2013, they adopted a complete streets master plan, and that has guided them ever since. They've phased the project because sometimes you can't take the bite of the entire apple. You have to take it in chunks. And because of funding streams, you're going to be looking at state funding, federal funding, and it's not always going to be there for the taking. But I got to tell you, if you have the plan in place and you go and you show it to the state agencies and the federal agency, you have a much greater chance of securing those funds. The same holds true for your neighbor to the north, Windsor Locks. Started a downtown master plan in 2008. And basically one of the recommendations was to move the train station back into the town center after it had left 40 years ago. Where it is today, it's basically a glorified bus shelter. Has no opportunity for transit-oriented development. That master plan said move it back, and because of that study, the state DOT came full circle. At first they were hesitant, they were worried about the intersection going across the Connecticut River, but they came aboard because they knew that if there was housing around the station, that was going to help drive numbers on the Hartford lines. That was going to be a benefit to them. That Montgomery building that sat there vacant for over 10 years, now converted to 160 units of mixed income housing. It's been just a tremendous success. So I think we really have to give kudos to DOT and the state leadership for moving those projects forward, both the Hartford line and the fast track. You probably just saw that over 1 million riders have been on the Hartford line since its inception in June of 2018. So that's awesome news. The other thing from my experience is going to be leadership, local leadership. Based on the communities that I've dealt with, for instance, in New Britain, Mayor Stewart is a dynamo, right, and will not take no for an answer. And she will work through each of the state agencies to get to yes. There might be a no to begin with, but she finds a way to get to yes. The same holds true for what's happened in Windsor Locks. Their first selectman, Steve Warwick, when the plan was initiated, and now their current first selectman, the same deal. Just won't take no for an answer. And working with the state legislative contingent in your community. So it's a burden, certainly for Peter and Don and Jane going forward, but they need to hear from you. They need to know that you support the road diet or whatever other complete streets improvements are going to be there. If they have that confidence, they will take that to the state legislature and state agencies and make things happen locally.
Jeez, road diets, debt diets, my Lord. Listen, we've got 3 people that have been very involved in the planning process, but at the end of the day, it takes private investment and vision to make things change. And we're very proud that we've been able to do that. In Weathersfield, when we started the board, and there was a dilapidated old building that sat there, and it was a very tough site. It was an eyesore right in the center of town. Once we were able to take that down and create a new vision and add some vitality, the Puritan furniture store behind us was sold to a developer who's now doing 80,000 square feet of medical, which is going to fill our apartments, fill the restaurants. It feeds on each other, and it's happening here in Windsor. And you know, the bones of this city are so beautiful. I don't think you could ever duplicate what's here now. And I'm anxious to see the next phase for this. But you know, it takes private investment, it takes vision, and we need to work on some things. Peter, you've heard me on this before, but there's 2 topics that really send me to the moon. So if it's okay, I'd like to talk about them.
One of these the same topics. Can you add it to the list, Marty?
One is we are behind the curve with environmental work. You know, most of our cities, you know, right here in Windsor, you know, it's one of the oldest towns in the state. And of course, being proximate to the rail station, that's where most of your industrial activity worked. We need, once there's a remediation action plan approved, and there's a licensed environmental professional to oversee it, the regulators got to get the heck out of the way and stop dabbling. The regulation was made so that they won't be involved. They overdo it. They spend a lot of money that's not really going back into the community. There's a balance, I get it. But we need to get regulators out of the way and let the legislation that was passed work.
You're speaking about state regulators.
State. I'm not talking about state. You don't have jurisdiction there for the most part.
From the Department of Environmental Protection, not the DOT.
Correct. Correct. The other thing that's maddening, that's going on right now, you know, I learned from a guy named David Ransom, who was a professor at Trinity College and was an expert on historic buildings. One of the smartest guys I ever met, and knew every building in Hartford and its surrounding towns inside and out. And he taught me back in the 80s that historic preservation should be a driver for economic development. And unfortunately, in Washington and even in our state of Connecticut to a much lesser extent, people are getting caught up in the regulations. Oh, that was a brick wall. It was originally painted, so you can't sandblast that brick or else you lose the tax credits that drive this thing. These people are losing it. They're not keeping the focus on restoring a building, bringing it back to life. The regulations are driving their thought process, and they're not giving due mind to economic development. Here, we need, particularly, we've got historic bones that a lot of other states have. We need to make these regulations work for economic growth, not stymie it.
I just want to add one or two things, and thank you very much for you guys making the comment, because I think we are in a good place. We have the master plan in place, and I want to make sure everyone understands that the town council and other boards and commissions have taken steps to implement the master plan that was developed in 2014. But a master plan is a living document. It continues to evolve and change. I need to give credit to past town council for their willingness to take some risks financially. You all know First Town Square, as I call it, 33 Mechanic Street. That building was dilapidated, falling apart. Everyone was pulling their hair out to figure out what to do with it. And we were able to help incentivize some private investment. The town council put monies up, your monies up, to be able to help remediate the environmental conditions that were there, and $850,000 investment by the town of Windsor created those 50 apartments, which have held their value since they were that building had the adaptive reuse. And the same thing here with the Windsor Station Apartment. The town council went and took that risk and partnered with Lexington Partners to be able to remediate the town's property. First of all, they assembled property. There was a small commercial warehouse building here, if you recall. The town acquired that property, assembled that with the town's property, and then they made the investment with Marty and his partners to remediate, to assist in remediation, and provided a relatively modest tax abatement for this project to make sure that in this first 1 to 5 years that it was able to get stabilized and financially on its feet. So my thanks to the town council for being able to see the vision and then be able to take action to be able to help implement that. There's a number of other actions that are small and large. The largest one perhaps being the road diet concept between the Palisado, Bloomfield Ave, intersection going south towards approximately Batchelder or Sycamore. And that's a heavy lift. That's in a lot of different ways. And so those conversations as a community need to take place in order for the town council to be able to decide if they need to move, if they would like to move forward working in partnership with the DOT. Back to you, Brandon.
So thank you all very much. Behind them, up on the board there, are some of the responses that were submitted to the poll that Tony put out. And it's interesting because walkability, bike routes, more than 50% of the people that participated thought that was one of the most important things, as well as more businesses, restaurants, and housing. So the question that I put is, do any of you have any questions for this panel at this time? There are so many different topics that we could actually touch on if you want to. In addition to working as the Economic Development Director for the City of Hartford, it's my 11th day today. I was also with the Department of Transportation for 7.5 years. So I've actually worked with these three guys before and know about every single project they're talking about. So if you guys have any questions at all, we'll be more than happy to answer them. Let me start with the young lady up here.
I mean, to be very basic, what about sidewalks? Nobody talks about stuff like sidewalks. I look, for example, at the sidewalk next to the Historical Society, the brick walk there, which I know has been fixed in some way, but it's still really not safe to walk on. And there's not sidewalks in my neighborhood. I mean, I walk, it's not busy, but, so sidewalks is a basic concept. Is there anything working on that?
Can I start before, because I'm going to start for you, but I'm not talking about Windsor. Sidewalks in general are a conversation within the state. Having worked with the Department of Transportation, they're a little bit of a challenge. So there's a safety aspect, but then there's the aspect that we have to build it, and that's one cost, and then it has to be maintained depending on where it is. So if we put it into a private, so where I live, there are sidewalks on one side of the street. If we decided that it was safer to put them on both sides of the street, I can tell you that I'm sure some of those property owners would be down, just as you're saying we should have more, they'd be down here saying you're creating additional work for us. I'm just saying, it's not as easy as it sounds. I'm going to turn it over to you, Peter.
I think you answered the question, Randy. Yes, sidewalks are critical. They're the connectivity between our neighborhoods. There are a wide variety of neighborhoods in any community, but in Windsor, it depended upon when those neighborhoods were built. Those subdivisions came into place. Our subdivision rules have changed over time, and now any new neighborhood or subdivision that's built, we require sidewalks. Back 30, 40 years ago, that was not the case, and so you see those gaps. And so we do have plans within our 6-year capital improvement program to be able to try to make some of those, close some of those gaps. Councilor Gavoni just mentioned last night at the town council meeting regarding the, some gaps up in the Pequannock neighborhood along Route 75. And just to be clear, the state does not do sidewalks at all. They don't do sidewalks. I've had many conversations with the state regarding that. I lived on Palisade Avenue the first year or so I was in town, and I couldn't walk. I was only 3/4 of a mile away from town center, and I could do it myself, but I wouldn't walk at certain times of day along Palisado. So those are some issues. So we have monies within our CIP. We have a tremendous amount of those sidewalk gaps. The focus within town center is to try to close some of those gaps. But I know, Marshall, where you live, you're not too far away from town center. You're right, around the corner, and so, but to try to get there to here is a difficult challenge.
We're going to go to the gentleman in the back who had a question a few moments ago.
I mean, listening to all of you, the idea of this road diet, which is a nice buzzword for how do we turn Windsor Center from a limited access highway into slowing down the traffic. I live up in Pequannock, and I've tried to ride my bike into it. I've done this. And, you go down Palisado, you come into the center, and you're taking your life in your hands. How the heck do you navigate? My building's is on the corner of Maple and Broad. And getting yourself over there, it gets very, very dangerous to get across the Palisade over there when you're dealing with the crazy traffic that goes through town. So, I mean, we hear
Down
about,
Aquatic where 38 is.
yeah, or Aquatic where 38 is another place which is just, that's just insanity, you know, where it goes down from 2 lanes to 1 lane. It's just bizarre, okay? There's a million accidents over there, and you got to take a bike through there. It's just crazy. I don't even go that way. I go through 8 stations to avoid it. But the point is that we hear about it. What's the feasibility? I mean, I was talking to Jane about it too. Feasibility of this actually happening, where we do make, you know, through the center 1 lane on each side. We have parking like Middletown or something like that, and you know where, you know, you go into Middletown, it's just crazy. The pedestrian traffic and people parking, businesses are going crazy down there. And so, I mean, what's the feasibility of this other than us talking about it and nauseating about it, really?
Can I just add to him? Would a designated bike walk lane be easier than sidewalks?
Because they have that in West Hartford, and you still put your like into your hands and going West Hartford, like it says a bike lane, no. Talk about Windsor Center and when we finish. Like that really bothers me. In my lifetime, I'm probably not going to see that finish, I feel like. That building has been worked on for how many years? So how many years are we talking about?
I'm going to speak to the doctor's question first and try to wrap in some of the other pieces. The challenge of converting from an auto-centric infrastructure, roadway system, is going to be a tremendous challenge, and it's going to be incremental in nature. And the town center road diet is feasible. It's physically feasible. There is a tremendous amount of financial investment that needs to be made in producing the on-street parking. So you have to do bump outs. And as you guys leave, as you folks leave, I do have a few diagrams that show that concept if you'd like to look at it. We have had conversations with the Connecticut Department of Transportation. That department has changed its philosophy and view tremendously in the last 15 years, particularly in the last 10 years. And I think Matt spoke to it, where now they're much more attentive to what's happening in our town centers and our neighborhoods. Where in most main streets across the state are state roads, and so they're much more in tune with that. We have recently updated doing some baseline work in terms of traffic counts and turning movements in town center in that stretch that I spoke of. So we have that initial engineering traffic study that's been completed. Part of the next step is to re-engage with the Department of Transportation to show them how those numbers have changed in the last 7 or 8 years. And to be quite honest with you, they haven't changed drastically. And we were a little bit, had some concerns about what this center, this development did here. And thankfully it didn't change traffic, because a lot of people are walking. A lot of folks here only have 1 car and not 2 or 3 like my family does. So, so the next step is there, but also this conversation is similar to this. And again, I thank First on Downtown for this opportunity to restart that conversation, and really be able to show within the town council's operating the town's budget. Currently this year, there's $150,000 that have been allocated to continue really that design of the road diet. And so I do need to go back to the town council to ask for those dollars, but the town council had the foresight a year ago when the budget got adopted to set aside approximately $150,000, which is the initial seed money, if you will, to do the design. And within the capital improvement program for the coming fiscal year, there's additional design money as well. So the biggest piece here is you have to have the traffic signals all coordinated, all the way from Pearson Lane, all the way in, and then out along Bloomfield Avenue. We did many years ago, Matt, a trial of, we narrowed down, and I'll still remember that. Our former town engineer almost had a heart attack because traffic was backed up all the way past Pearson Lane from Palisado, and so partly because we didn't have the signals synchronized. And technology today is much better to be able to synchronize those lights. So there are steps, initial steps, but overall, I need to throw the dollar figure out there. We're talking about, in today's dollars, over a $4 million investment, potentially, to make all those physical changes for that roughly 3/4 of a mile. Clearly, that's a huge investment. Clearly, we'd be talking to our state legislators and the Department of Transportation to try to help contribute those dollars to that effort. So there's another question that was here. There are, in terms of our vision plan, I can't go through all those steps that we've.
No,
but
when's the building's going to be done?
You're talking about specifically.
The one that Mr. Sopdach thinks I don't
Well,
understand. Because I think it's a serious concern. My husband and I have breakfast every Sunday at Dom's. We grocery shop at Geysers. Wouldn't it be nice if in the evening when we want to do something, we had a choice to go someplace in Windsor other than Union Street or another restaurant? We go across the river and we have dinner at the restaurants that are over there. You know, I would walk down to the center. That vision is ridiculous. That is still.
So this is a question that get asked frequently,
I'm sure it
and there are that, not to be glib, but there are the owner property rights, and the owner can do by and large what they choose to do with their building. That particular property owner has made significant reinvestments in that building that are not visible. That building was basically falling down on itself in terms of a mechanical systems within that. So they've made significant investments. Would I love to be able to walk across the street from my office and maybe have...
But they chose the project to do, so to me, how long does it go on? Do we wait another 10 years?
Hopefully not.
15 years?
Hopefully not. Hopefully it'll be 10 weeks. Hopefully it'll be 10 months. I don't know specifically, but I think that's But that's the point. The town has certain abilities to incentivize, but at the same time, it's a private investment that an individual has made. We've been able to work closely with a number of property owners, and I do believe the property owners there have the best intentions, and we'll be able to hopefully see some additional progress, outward progress, in the coming months.
Can I add something? No, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
How many restaurants do you think are in Windsor? Does anyone have a guess?
In Windsor, the town or the center?
No, the town in general.
77.
We actually have 43 restaurants in the town of Windsor. And even in Windsor Center, it has grown. We have 3 full-service restaurants, and it's growing, and that is a catalyst to what we need to do, and it's important. And I did have a question for Mr. Penny. What vision, you could have developed many properties across the state, probably into Massachusetts, wherever. Why did you choose Windsor?
I thought the potential here was so incredible because of the architecture, just the way the center was, I remember coming here in 6th and 7th grade, dropping a sibling off at Loomis, and so I've always had this sort of romantic feel for the center. I thought it was where West Hartford was in the early 70s, and I'm hopeful in the next 10 to 15 years it goes to another level, because everything is here.
You have all the puzzle pieces, it's just...
Aga, you had a question, and you run this place.
No, all I wanted to say was I'm sure it's worth the wait. I know it's hard with owners, especially when you're private, with the money. I'm just happy he's just not throwing something together, so it's not going to work out. I think he's really taking his time and effort.
Can I say something about the plaza?
Yeah.
Because I grew up in town. My first movie I went to was in the plaza.
Yeah. A lot of people here.
Who else went to their first movie in the plaza? Okay, it was a pit. Daniil's doing a great job. It's slow, but he's doing a great job of getting it there. It's going to be way better than it was. It's not gonna have sticky floors and sticky seats that we won't welcome. So let's just be patient.
I mean, you could
it's slower than we expected.
He really does an amazing job. And also, I wanted to add, I do not live in Windsor. I did not ever come to this center before I started working here. I have 2 kids. I come to this town on the weekends. I go to Northwest Park. I go to the Bean. My family comes to the Bean. It really is. There is so much potential in this town, and the residents see it. They love it. A lot of people that moved to this apartment community from out of state bought houses in Windsor just because they fell in love with it.
Perfect incubator. You looking to buy? I'm like 4 blocks away.
I think we only have time for a couple of more questions. We can go a little bit late, and I don't even know where to start. Your hands, she didn't put her hand down for like ever, so.
I'm a first time downtown, also a local realtor. I just listed a house, charming house a lot of you have seen online. In 48 hours, we had 7 showings and 4 offers. One of the parties that made an offer, very generous offer, she lives in Northampton and sells real estate in Cambridge. She said, I came to Windsor, I drove around the places you told me about. She wanted to get a feel for Windsor. And she went very generously above list price, cash offer, saw the sidewalks, saw the vibrancy of the town, the coffee shop, told her to drive through Loomis and everything, and said, you cannot touch a place like Windsor, get anywhere close to it. The taxes they pay in Northampton, as well as you can't get anything under 500,000 or 600,000 in Cambridge. But she said, everything I'm looking for is right here in Windsor. So, and I get that all the time. Second point, she's moving with her mother. And I could have sold this one listing 6 times for people that are a little bit more mature than I am, age-wise. I shared with my husband when we live on the other side of Windsor Park, with Washington Park. My parents had their first date on Washington Park, a blind date, so I'm a townie. Came home from seeing this listing, told my husband about it. I said, I want that house, but it won't fit our family. We just hosted 40 people. He, of course, said, I think we should buy it. But I'm talking about that next population of people who do not want to go into assisted living or over 55 living. They want Windsor Center. They want the walkability. So we cannot duplicate, or there are many towns that cannot duplicate what we have. And I think it's in our best interest to make it more accessible to so many generations.
So.
Peter.
Yes. Go ahead.
A question. You started by saying this road widening would be a heavy lift, but it sounds like it is included in the 2014 master plan. Am I right or wrong? Is it part of it?
Absolutely. The concept of the road diet and narrowing it down from the 2 through lanes to essentially 3 lanes, 2 in each direction with the turn lane and on-street parking is within the 2014 master plan. And we do have some initial seed money available for design.
Is the town committed to going through with it? I cannot figure out from this discussion, is it going to happen?
Well, there's a lot of different steps. Okay. There's a lot of different steps. And part of that is that there's mixed, quite frankly, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was mixed feelings about this.
That's what I thought.
There's mixed feelings. And so the next step is to be able to have the town council be able to say, yes, we do want to continue and initiate the design process. And that will be a multi-year process. This is if we started today with design and got all the money lined up, we're talking a 3 to 4 year process, assuming everything went really well. So I can't speak for the town council. I think the plan had been endorsed overall by the Planning and Zoning Commission, but there's a lot of different strategies and steps within the overall master plan, and each one, not necessarily each single one of those, but many of those have to go back through a variety of different review processes.
I just can't see walkability in Windsor while we still have 4 lanes of traffic.
I agree.
David?
Yes.
Nice to see you.
I was just wondering how we reconcile different transit projects that are part of this center plan. For example, the road that you mentioned, about $4 million in this whole process. But what about the new train station and such? Are they competing against each other in terms of the resources that go into it? And which one gets the priority? How is that determined?
And to a certain degree they're competing, but they also are working through different funding sources. For example, the renovation for the long-term plan for the commuter station here with the high-level platforms and the pedestrian up and over will come from a completely different pot of money than the road work, for the road diet, excuse me. Road diet's probably going to be a combination of state funding through a couple different sources, and to be quite bluntly with you, we want this as a community. The state's going to be looking to us, do we put up a few bucks along the way, 10, 15, 20% towards that. And Windsor's been very successful at that in achieving grants over the years where we'll put some skin in the game and just not look for with our hand out completely. So there is some competition, but they're really, in those two major projects, they're two separate pots of money.
So unfortunately, we're kind of, this is going to have to be the last one because we're kind of right at
Well, one thing I'd like to discuss, I understand this concept, I've been following it for a long time. And the mechanics of it, the roadways and the designs and the diets and all that, that's pretty much in place. But one thing as a community we can't forget about is who are we doing this for? And the reason I say it is I'm a board director on Willa. We have 27 group homes in this town. We provide residency and vocation abilities for our residents. There's 4 or 5 homes in the center, a couple condos. These folks walk through the town. They're employed in the town. We see it's very unfortunate that Melissa got injured. So we really have to think, before we put all these diets and everything we want, we really have to identify our population, economically, socially, nationally, however you want to do it, and see what we have, and come up with a plan. And then find out which one of these plans work best for Windsor, so everybody in this town can have the same experience. And that's what Complete Streets is really about. That's what drives it. So, thank you.
Nice.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That was a great comment. So I'm going to turn it back over in just one moment. First of all, I want to thank you all very much. I want to give a great hand to our panelists for I also want to point out that there's a flyer, and if you haven't filled it out, you can add your information to that in terms of what you think. It's online, and if you grab the flyer before you leave, you will also see that. Also, eat food so it doesn't go to waste. And I want to thank you for having me here, and I'm going to turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randall, and thank you for facilitating. Great job. First time downtown, thank you for coming. The energy in the room is incredible. And I want to thank our partners in this, which is Transport Hartford, Windsor's Drinking Liberally, and the Windsor Chamber of Commerce for their help in putting this together. I want to thank Union Street Tavern for their good food and for ordering there.
And Jins and Geislers for the
We have several counselors here today. We have Joe McCullough, Lisa Bress, and Jim Gavoni, who just spoke, and our Mayor Don Trinks, who is around the corner over there. Which is good, because he's usually telling me to stand up. Yeah. And I also want to thank Jenny from Win TV, who's here filming today. So that means that people that couldn't be here will get to watch it on our public access. And again, thank you all. It was great. It was informative. If you have any questions, let us know.
And like Randall said, please fill out the survey because that helps us understand the pattern of what people want.